I spent 10 years becoming an adult beside a man who stayed exactly where I found him. And the worst part was, he loved me like I was the only light left in his life. For a long time I thought that made leaving impossible. Not hard. Not painful. Impossible. Because how do you walk away from someone who looks at you like you are the wall between him and the dark? How do you pack a bag, sign a lease, untangle bills, split furniture and say this is over, when the person standing in front of you has built his whole world around the idea that you will never go? I was 28 when I finally admitted the truth to myself. Not out loud. Not at first. At first, it was just a quiet sentence that started showing up in the back of my mind while I was brushing my teeth, driving to work, opening the fridge, folding laundry, lying awake beside him in the blue wash of the bedroom light. I do not want this life anymore. It was such a simple thought. So small. Almost plain. But once it arrived, it would not leave. It sat there while I made coffee. It sat there while he slept in. It sat there while I checked my email, paid another bill, answered another message, made another plan for both of us because if I did not make the plan, nothing moved. 10 years earlier, I had met him when we were still young enough to mistake potential for a promise. He was 31 now. I was 28. But somehow, in the strange math of our relationship, I had kept aging forward while he remained preserved in the shape of the man I first loved. Back then, his uncertainty had seemed gentle. His lack of direction had seemed temporary. His sadness had seemed like something love could soften. I thought we were both unfinished, both trying, both carrying different parts of the same future. So I worked. I studied. I finished my degree. I built a career. I learned how to save money. I learned how to make appointments and keep them. I learned how to read fine print, answer uncomfortable emails, cook when I was exhausted, show up when I did not feel ready. I became someone I could rely on. I came along for the ride. That sounds cruel when I say it plainly. For years I could not say it plainly. I dressed it up in kinder words. He was struggling. He had been through a lot. His family had hurt him. His mental health had not been easy. Jobs had fallen apart. School had not worked out. He needed time. He needed support. He needed stability. He needed someone to believe in him. And I did. I believed in him so hard that sometimes I forgot to believe my own eyes. I believed in the version of him who was always about to start, about to apply, about to enroll, about to get serious, about to change, about to become the man he kept promising he wanted to be. There was always a reason it had not happened yet. There was always a bad month, a bad boss, a bad mood, a bad memory, a bad stretch. And I kept thinking once this passes we will begin. But the years passed instead. Quietly. Then loudly. Then all at once. There are some disappointments that do not arrive like storms. They arrive like dust. One little layer on the counter. One little layer on the windowsill. One little layer over the photograph of who you thought you were going to be. At first you wipe it away without thinking. Then one day you look around and realize the whole house is gray. That was what loving him had become. Not one terrible incident. Not one betrayal sharp enough to make the leaving clean. Just 10 years of watching myself grow tired. 10 years of caring more than I admitted. 10 years of translating his pain into permission for my own life to stay small. He loved me. That part was true. And because it was true, it trapped me more than if he had been cruel. If he had been cruel, I could have left angry. If he had cheated, I could have left righteous. If he had shouted ugly things at me, if he had slammed doors, if he had made himself into an obvious villain, maybe I would have known what to do with the pain. But he was not a monster. He was sad. He was lost. He was needy. He was tender in the moments that made leaving feel brutal. He would look at me across the room with those tired eyes and say I was the only good thing in his life. And every time he said it, something inside me folded. Because how do you tell someone the only good thing in their life is exhausted? How do you say, I cannot keep being your reason to breathe? How do you say, I love you, but your love has become a room with no door? I started rehearsing the breakup in my head long before I ever spoke it. In the shower, I would whisper sentences under the water. I am not happy. This relationship is not working for me. I need to move on. We need to separate. Each sentence sounded too cold, then too soft, then too open to argument. I knew him. I knew how panic could turn him into a storm. I knew how quickly a conversation could become a plea, and then a promise, and then a crisis. He would say he could change. He would say he finally understood. He would say he would do anything. And the cruel thing was, maybe in that moment he would mean it. But I had spent years learning that meaning something is not the same as doing it. Regret is not a plan. Tears are not a future. Love is not adulthood. Still I was afraid. Afraid of hurting him. Afraid of being the villain in his story. Afraid he would fall apart and I would have to watch the damage with my hands behind my back. There was another fear too, one I hated admitting. I was afraid that if I stayed one more year, I would stop recognizing myself. Because I had begun to feel like my life was waiting on a platform, holding a ticket for a train that never came. Every birthday made the feeling sharper. Every friend moving forward made it harder to ignore. People were buying houses, changing careers, having babies, getting married, getting divorced, moving cities, beginning again. And I was still there. In the same apartment. With the same explanations. With the same man who loved me deeply and could not seem to stand up inside his own life. The night before I ended it, I barely slept. He was beside me, breathing heavily, one arm thrown across the blanket. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heater, and the small clicks the building made when the temperature dropped. I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine the morning after. Not the conversation. Not the crying. Not the logistics. Just the morning after. A room where I could wake up and know I had finally told the truth. Felt impossible to picture. So I pictured smaller things. My own keys in my own hand. A lease with only my name on it. A kitchen where every cup was exactly where I left it. A weekend that did not have to be shaped around his moods. A silence that belonged to me. The hope was so delicate I almost did not trust it. By the time I came home from work the next day, my body already knew what I was going to do. My hands were cold. My throat felt tight. I remember the ordinary ugliness of it all. The bag on my shoulder. The sound of my shoes at the door. The light in the living room. The smell of something stale in the air, old coffee maybe, or laundry that should have been moved hours earlier. He looked up, and for 1 second I almost lost my nerve. Because there he was. Not a symbol. Not a problem. Not an anchor. Person. A man I had loved through most of my 20s. A man who knew the shape of my laugh. A man who had been beside me in apartments and hospitals and holidays and quiet Sunday afternoons. A man who had also watched me bend myself into a support beam and called it love. I did not sit down. If I sat down, I thought I might soften. If I softened, I might explain too much. If I explained too much, he might find a place to argue. So I stood there with my coat still on and said it before fear could climb into my mouth. I am not happy. I have not been happy for a long time. We need to separate. The words landed between us like something heavy dropped on tile. For a moment he did not understand. Or maybe he understood completely and his mind simply refused to accept it. His face changed slowly. Confusion first. Then fear. Then that awful wet panic that made me want to take every word back just to stop seeing it. He asked what I meant. I told him again. This relationship is over. We are separating. I had imagined that sentence so many times that I thought saying it would feel like stepping off a cliff. Instead, it felt like cutting a rope that had been wrapped around my ribs. Painful. Terrifying. Necessary. He began to talk fast. Too fast. He said he knew things had been bad. He said he could fix it. He said he would go back to school. He said he would look for better work. He said he would make a schedule, make calls, make changes, make himself into the person I had been waiting for. And there it was. The future I had wanted. Offered to me only when I was already at the door. It hurt more than I expected. Not because I believed it. Because part of me still wanted to. Part of me wanted to collapse into the fantasy that this was the moment everything finally turned. That all the waiting had not been wasted. That the man I loved had simply needed the right emergency to become real. But another part of me, the part that had been quiet for too long, stood up inside my chest. No, not anymore. That first conversation did not end neatly. Breakups like that never do. There was no clean fade to black. No gentle music. No elegant final line. There was just a living room, 2 people, and 10 years of shared life cracking open under fluorescent light. He cried. He pleaded. He asked how I could do this. He asked what he was supposed to do without me. He told me again that I was his whole world, and this time the words did not feel romantic. They felt heavy. They felt like a chain someone had polished and called jewelry. I told him I was sorry. I told him I cared about him. I told him I could not be his future just because he had not built one of his own. Not in those exact words. I was not that sharp. I was shaking too hard. But that was the truth under everything. We made a temporary arrangement because real life, rude and practical, does not pause for heartbreak. There was a lease. There were rooms. There were bills. There were objects everywhere that suddenly looked guilty. The couch where we had watched movies. The mugs we had bought on a trip. The framed print I had chosen. The lamp he hated but never moved. The extra blankets. The drawer full of cords nobody could identify. We agreed he could stay in the extra bedroom for a while. Few months. Until things were sorted. Until the lease was up. Until the life we had built could be taken apart without setting the whole building on fire. But living with someone after breaking their heart is its own strange weather. Every hallway becomes a negotiation. Every closed door becomes a message. Every small sound at night carries meaning. I would hear him moving around in the other room, and guilt would sit on my chest like a cat made of stone. Sometimes he was quiet. Sometimes he was too quiet. Sometimes he would knock and I could feel my whole body brace. There were meltdowns. Real ones. Not theatrical in a simple way. Not fake. Just raw panic spilling out of him because the structure of his life had been removed, and he did not know how to stand without it. He promised again. He promised in different words. He promised with tears. He promised with plans. He promised with desperation. And every promise was a little knife because every promise asked me to ignore the decade before it. I had to learn something brutal during those months. Compassion is not the same as surrender. You can feel sorry for someone and still keep walking. You can love someone and still not let them pull you back into a life that is eating you alive. You can be the cause of someone's pain without being wrong. That last one was the hardest. I had always wanted to be good. Not perfect. Just good. The kind of woman who stayed when things were hard. The kind of partner who did not abandon someone because they were struggling. The kind of person who could be counted on. But somewhere along the way, I had confused being counted on with being consumed. I had confused loyalty with self-erasure. I had confused his need for me with proof that I had to stay. And now I was trying to become someone new while still living across the hall from the person who wanted the old version back. The version who waited. The version who softened. The version who heard I cannot live without you and treated it like a commandment. That version of me had kept us alive for a long time. But she could not carry me any farther. The months after the breakup were not triumphant. I want to be honest about that. Freedom did not burst through the window wearing sunlight. Came in small suspicious pieces. A quiet dinner alone. A drive where I did not have to explain where I was going. A bank account I watched with a feeling that was almost awe. A calendar that belonged to me. But grief came too. Not grief for the future we were actually going to have. Grief for the future I had imagined when I was young enough to believe love could be a ladder two people climbed at the same pace. I mourned the man he might have been. I mourned the woman I might have become sooner. I mourned the 10 years when I had mistaken waiting for devotion. Sometimes I would find myself remembering the good moments with a force that made me doubt everything. The way he laughed when he was truly relaxed. The way he looked on certain mornings when the light caught his face and I could see the boy he had been before life bruised him. The private jokes. The tiny rituals. The comfort of being known. It would have been easier if the relationship had been all bad. But it had not been all bad. That was why it took 10 years. That was why leaving felt less like escaping a cage and more like walking out of a house I had once loved, knowing I could not afford to repair it anymore. He did not become calm overnight. He did not suddenly transform into someone reasonable just because I had made a decision. There were still conversations that left me drained. Still moments when his sadness reached for me like a hand through a closing door. Still nights when I wondered if I was selfish. But each time that question came, another question followed. If staying requires me to disappear, who exactly is being loved? Not me. Not really. A version of me. A function. A shelter. A person-shaped life raft. That realization was ugly, but it was useful. Because once I understood that, I stopped measuring my goodness by how much pain I could absorb. I started measuring my life by whether I was actually living it. Eventually, the lease ended. The final days in that apartment felt unreal. Boxes appeared. Shelves emptied. The walls looked naked. Every room echoed more than it used to. It is strange how a home can become a set after the story is over. You stand in it and think, I cried here. I loved here. I lost myself here. And now it is just square footage someone else will rent. I signed a new lease by myself. Just my name. My signature. My responsibility. My beginning. I remember staring at the paperwork longer than I needed to. The words were plain and legal and dull, but to me they looked almost sacred. A door with ink hinges. A small official permission slip to become myself again. When I got the keys, I held them in my palm and felt a kind of fear I had not expected. Not the fear of being trapped. The fear of being free. Because when no one is leaning on you, you have to notice the shape of your own life. You have to decide what you want for dinner. What color the towels should be. How quiet the room can get before you stop trying to fill it. Who you are when no one is asking you to be their entire world. At first, the silence in my new place was enormous. It stretched from wall to wall. But slowly it stopped feeling empty. It started feeling clean. I began to breathe differently. That is the best way I can describe it. Not happy every second. Not healed. Not untouched by guilt. Just able to take a full breath without hitting the invisible wall I had lived against for years. Life had an excitement to it again. A thin gold thread running through ordinary days. I went to work and felt present. I came home and felt the room open around me. I made plans without calculating someone else's collapse. I bought groceries for one person and found the smallness of it beautiful. I started casually seeing someone in my field. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I wanted to turn into a grand replacement story. It was simply startling to talk to someone whose life moved under its own power. Someone with momentum. Someone who did not need me to become a rescue mission before the conversation could begin. And maybe that was when I understood just how tired I had been. Not from loving him. From managing the consequences of his refusal to grow. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from being someone's hope when they will not build any for themselves. It makes you feel cruel for wanting sunlight. It makes your dreams feel like betrayals. It makes your own future seem optional. But it is not optional. Your life is not a waiting room for someone else's transformation. Your 20s are not a storage unit for another person's potential. Your love is not proof that you must stay forever. I know there are people who will hear this story and want to ask whether I abandoned him, whether I should have tried harder, whether 10 years should have meant more. And I understand those questions. I asked them first. I asked them until they hollowed me out. But here is what I know now. 10 years did mean something. They meant I tried. They meant I believed. They meant I gave patience, chances, comfort, money, energy, forgiveness, attention, and hope. They meant I stood beside someone long enough to learn that standing beside him was not helping either of us move. They meant the leaving was not sudden just because the sentence was. By the time I said we were separating, I had already spent years saying it silently to myself. The breakup was not the beginning of the end. It was the first honest thing after a very long ending. I do not hate him. I do not want him punished for being lost. I hope he builds a life that does not require a woman to disappear inside it. I hope he finds help. Real help. The kind that does not come from a girlfriend's nervous system. I hope he learns that calling someone your everything can sound like love, but sometimes it is just fear with flowers in its hands. And I hope he survives the pain of losing me long enough to discover he was always more than my absence. As for me, I am learning to live without being needed quite so desperately. I am learning that peace can feel strange at first. I am learning that guilt is not always a warning. Sometimes it is just the echo of an old role calling you back. And when that echo comes, I remind myself of the woman standing in the doorway with her coat still on, shaking so hard she could barely speak. The woman who finally said the words, "I am not happy. I have not been happy for a long time. We need to separate." She thought she was destroying a life. But really, she was saving one. Her own.